like what
Yeah.
you're attempting to do as the player as yeah, well, I don't want to spoil too much.
Yeah, I guess I should have asked about how spoilery do we get
Yeah, I
with this
mean,
game. I feel like I may have said too much in the past parts of the interview.
well, I think you're vague enough that
Okay.
it's okay, because only the people who know will get what you're talking about.
Sure.
Hello, and welcome to episode 151 of Rhythm Encounter, the RPG fan music podcast. I am normally your host, Mike Salbato, but today I'm actually just introducing our special interview episode. As you can tell from the title, this time we talked to Brandon Boone, composer on Slay the Princess, and of course, he has many other credits, which we will also get into. But that is what is happening today. Longtime RPG fan music editor Patrick Gann actually conducted this interview separately. He's not here in the room with me right now. So I am here to tell you what we're talking about, and then I will pass the baton over to Patrick. Slay the Princess, if you're listening to this show or anything RPG fan, you've probably at least heard of it. Slay the Princess is a really, really cool and stylish horror adventure game that came out in 2023 for PC. And then just a few months ago, the console and expanded release, the Pristine Cut, released also for PC, but also on consoles. So Slay the Princess made quite a big splash last year and maybe even a bigger one this year. Not only being on more platforms and expanding the game, but most recently at the Indie Live Expo in Japan, it even won a couple of awards. It won the Best New Characters Award and even the grand prize of the expo itself. So it's safe to say that it is a beloved game by many people, most people who play it, from everything I hear and see and read. So we're very grateful to have Brandon on here and for Pat's time in organizing this and interviewing. So I'm not going to keep you here all day. That's what we're talking about today. So I will tell you, and I'm going to spend time and a lot of words carefully pointing out that there are major spoilers for Slay the Princess, major plot points in the game through to the end, because, this was the discussion about the game and how the music works in. So I think some of them were unavoidable, but I want you to know now, and it will be in the show notes and everywhere we can, that this is a spoiler-heavy episode for Slay the Princess. So if you have not played, if you're going to play, or just don't want the spoilers, be wary, or go play and come back and listen. But I want it to be very clear that there are no shortage of spoilers in this episode. So with that said, I'm going to hand this over to Patrick and Brandon. So go listen and enjoy.
Okay. Hi there, Brandon Boone, composer for Slay the Princess. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. How are you?
I am doing just fine. I am so excited to finally speak to you. It's been, over a year since the game came out and a few weeks since the Pristine Cut came out?
You got it.
So, yeah, I know there's just so much cool stuff going on in your life, and we're going to get into that. But first, I kind of just want to know and give our audience a sense of just basic background. Who are you? Because you're not just the guy who wrote Slay the Princess. We want to know about your other work as a musician, your studies, interests. So we'd love to hear, what's the deal? Who's this Brandon Boone guy?
I would say first and foremost, I am just the guy who wrote Slay the Princess's music, but I'm just kidding. So I am a composer by trade. I work on podcasts, now video games, some picture stuff, mostly indie films and stuff like that. I got my career started with a horror podcast called the No Sleep Podcast. I've been doing that for 11 years. That's how I met Tony and Abby. Abby in the past had done artwork for the show. So that's how I met them, which is the coolest thing to me because it's, obviously between Slay the Princess and Scarlet Hollow. I've been able to do some incredible things with them.
Yeah, and just for our listeners, Tony and Abby, as they're married, right? They're like a couple.
Yeah, they actually they are a couple, and they got married in 2020, I believe, and then had an actual wedding 2 months ago, which I was lucky enough to be invited to. Yeah.
Like they couldn't have like a ceremony because of COVID.
Right, yeah.
So it got delayed till now.
Exactly.
But yeah, so if you guys see the developer's name, Black Tabby, I think that the Tabby might be like Tony plus Abby.
Yeah.
But they're like the lead developers of Slay the Princess, and also a great game that not enough people talk about, Scarlet Hollow. And you've been working with them on both of those projects, right?
Correct. Yeah, they reached out in I guess it was early 2020, maybe late 2019, or somewhere around there. I can't remember if it actually started before or after the pandemic, but they're like, hey, we want to make a video game. Do you want to do the music? And I'm like, well, hell yeah, I do. Like, they're two of the most brilliant people I've ever met. So any chance to work with them, I'm going to jump at.
Yeah. So the No Sleep podcast, and you've done other podcast work and just sort of miscellaneous, but not game music related.
Correct.
And then, thanks to Tony and Abby, you didn't just dip your toes into the world of video game music. You're definitely in there. And, I think a lot of people are loving the soundtrack. Soundtracks at this point with Slay the Princess. We'll get to that too. Can you tell us a little bit about, you said you've been working professionally as a musician. Do you have any background in did you go to like college or graduate school to study music? And if so, where, what are your sort of your academic or professional connections there?
My academic accolades for music are incredibly underwhelming that they don't exist. I played guitar when I was a teenager, like every teenager does, for a very brief stint. And then I started dabbling in high school and college. I started trying to make like techno and electronica and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of where I started to get into like music writing software. Then that was in high school and in college. But in college itself, I actually have a business degree. I have a degree in marketing. I went to business school, so nothing too exciting about that.
Wow. So you found your way into music production through the No Sleep podcast then, or were you doing stuff before that?
So the whole start of the whole story for me was my wife volunteers at or used to volunteer at a radio station here in Cincinnati for the blind and visually impaired, and they had and they would do these like audio plays. And because I knew my way around like music production software enough, I kind of started doing scores for those. So I had a bit of a audio drama background, and then I was a fan of the No Sleep podcast, and David Cummings, the showrunner, mentioned that it was becoming a lot of work, and so I just kind of cold emailed him offering to help with the music. And now I've written over 10,000 tracks for that show, and it's been 11 years in the making for me.
Wow. That's like if you were like working on like a soap opera, like it just
right.
goes.
Yeah, it just goes and goes. Yeah.
That's amazing. And working on a project for people who are blind or visually impaired and like sort of bringing a media project to life just through sound. That just seems, really cool and really kind of special. Sounds like your wife is awesome too. All these cool married couples. We got Abby and Tony, and then you and your wife. This is good stuff. And you mentioned you're from the Cincinnati area over in Ohio.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. East Coast. Well, not quite East Coast, but Eastern time zone.
Sure. Yeah. We're as west as you can get before leaving the Eastern time zone. So.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I'm recording from Pittsburgh.
Okay. Yeah, you're not too far away.
Of course, RPG Fan has staff all across the world. We got a lot of East Coast and West Coast US, but we also got some great folks in Europe, Southeast Asia, all over the place.
That's amazing.
So always good times, but we're in the same time zone, which is fun. Cool. So, hey, let's jump into Slay the Princess. So we're recording in early November. And just a few days ago, I saw somewhere on social media, maybe Twitter/X or somewhere else, you won a pretty cool award, didn't you?
I did. I won the World Soundtrack Award for Best Game Music over in Belgium.
So two things about that. One, it was like a live show. So
Right.
like you like stand up, give a speech, like the whole thing, like a real award show.
Right.
And the other thing there is like I saw both the long list and the short list for nominations. And man, you were up against some heavy competition.
Well, yeah. When I first saw the long list, the joke I kept making was because, like, it's all by public voting, right?
Yeah.
And so I saw the long list, and the joke I always made to Tony and Abby were like, "I just hope I get to lose to Baldur's Gate in person," meaning that I would just get the nomination,
Yeah.
and lose in Belgium. So to win, I cannot describe how awestruck I was by that.
Yeah. It's wild. And yeah, we should note, yeah, the method of choice is, yeah, it's not some some small team of people discussing in a back room.
Right.
It was global voting. And I mean, that means, enough people were like, we really want this guy to get recognized for his work, over and above some big AAA names.
Right.
And yeah, I mean, the Baldur's Gate 3 soundtrack was no joke. Like, there was some great stuff there.
Oh yeah, Boris did an amazing job on that sound. It's one of my favorites from last year. I love that game. Like, I have no problems with all the accolades that game won. It's an amazing game.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, this speaks to the not just the quality of your music overall, but the emotional impact that it's had
Yeah.
on players is it's pretty big. And yeah, also notable though is, for anyone who hasn't played the game, one of the cool features of this game is every time you play it, you're going to go down a separate path, or really separate series of paths, and then at the end, after the end credits, the game gives you a custom playlist. It basically says, here are the songs for the adventure or the journey you took.
Right.
And so, like, from the full soundtrack, you can build a custom playlist of like, this was your musical journey. And I definitely know people who have like been like, oh, that was a real, like, usually their first or second playthrough is like something hit them really hard, and they'll actually like keep their custom playlist.
Right. Yeah. And that was I forget how that idea came about, but I was honestly really humbled by that, to have such a spotlight on the soundtrack at the end of the game. But I think it also plays to, like, when you first finish through Slay the Princess, it's such an emotional journey, and it's kind of like you're almost, to me at least, in my experience and watching other people play the game, it's almost like when it's over, it's kind of like finishing a really good book or something, and you're like, I can't believe this is over. I only want more of this.
Yeah.
So then to hit them with like, oh well, good news. Here's all the music you just heard during these, emotional escapades that you just went on. Enjoy. So yeah, I really love that.
I think that's, when it comes to people who own or collect or even just keep playlists of game music, it's often for games they've played, and it's sort of a short form way of recalling memory. It's a lot faster and more convenient than trying to just replay the whole game and hope for the same experience, which man, a bit of a spoiler there, but there is one path, and we're going to talk about it later, where the idea of taking the same thing and experiencing it over and over, and you get like this law of diminishing returns for how much you enjoy it. There's actually a path
Right.
in the game that goes over that phenomenon. And so instead of just playing the same game over and over again, which you can do with Slay the Princess, I'd say somewhere between like 5 and 10 times, and still be experiencing almost entirely new content.
Yeah.
At some point, you're going to get exhausted. And then having this sort of short form recall without digging deep into it, of just like hearing that song and being like, oh, right. Like, like for me, it's, we'll talk about it later, but Apotheosis is like,
Yeah.
that's like, for me, is just like Ooh, that's the one. But
I love how much people love that track.
I mean, it's a crazy scene, right?
Yeah.
Like in the context of the game, it's crazy. And
Right.
you made, and of course Amelia, her voice.
Mm-hmm.
And we need to get to Amelia. Gosh, so much good stuff here. I'm losing track of myself. I did want to ask, as far as the game goes, I think you had mentioned before we were recording, you've really only done like one or two like formal playthroughs because you've sort of seen the game's back end as you've developed it, as most composers
Right.
do. So you've only really like had the experience that a player has once or twice. And I want to ask it from that perspective in playing the game, do you have a favorite path or a favorite like vessel form of the princess that, either based on the artwork or what the story is within there and the choices, maybe just how well your music synced up with it? Do you have a favorite?
I have like 4 or 5 answers to this question, if that's okay.
I'll take all 5 answers.
So when the original game, the original concept, my favorite princess from that part of the game and my favorite artwork of any princess is the Nightmare. I'm a horror guy. That's where I come from. That's how I know Tony and Abby. The Nightmare is one of my favorite pieces that I got to write. It's my homage to Little Nightmares, the video game, which is one of my favorite games. So the Nightmare, the mask, the moment of clarity that it leads to with this huge existential crises of the cycle of life and death, and like that moment gets so heavy that I love that. That's like my original answer for the original game. The pristine cut, the damsel is my favorite now.
With the new paths
the new path,
yeah.
The happy ever after and the lights go out and all that stuff. It's like it's so emotional, and it's like it's absolutely heartbreaking. And so that's my favorite of the new stuff. Design wise, I love the cage.
Oh yeah.
The cage, I don't like. I really like the path in general, and I love like that the music I got to write for it. But like the design alone, just like the concept of the cage, just from an art standpoint, because Abby's so crazy with like the attention to detail with all of the chains and everything. Like, I've known Tony and Abby for years now, and like Hellraiser is a big thing that we always kind of meet up on.
Yeah, Clive Barker.
So the big Clive Barker vibes there. So love the cage.
Yeah, there's a few vessels that really bring out some serious Clive Barker. I mean, gosh, what's the one that comes out in one of the Paths for the Razor? Is it maybe the Fury? That one
with the exposed like open chests.
Yeah.
Demon.
That one creeps me out real good. There's some really fun dark stuff. I also agree with you about the Nightmare. That's the one where I think when you're talking to her, one of the voices has
the
to
heart,
just
lungs, liver, nerves.
Heart, lungs, liver, nerves has to keep repeating it under the conversation. That audio direction, who's the person who did the sound like weaving? There was like a sound director who handles like mixing the voice acting and the.
I think that was Tony. I know sound effects are. I know the sound effects are Phil Mikowski, but I don't know. I don't think anyone else did any sound blending or anything like that.
Okay, Tony handled that aspect.
I believe. I could be wrong on this, but I believe it was Tony. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, because I think my first time coming, running into the Nightmare, I was like, oh, there's a lot of layers here, and just getting the volume right on this has got to be tricky, but like it comes out so well, and it's terrifying, and it's really powerful. That's a great scene.
Yeah, what's funny is I actually get a lot of comments like people want me to add the hearts, lungs, liver, nerves to the soundtrack, and I'm like, it's not part of the score, guys.
No. But that's one where you're going to have to play the game or at least watch a long play, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. That's so cool. Yeah. Good picks. So let's talk a little bit about what it took for you to craft the OST. And I want to start with just the base OST before we get into Pristine Cut, the live tracks, the lost cuts. Before we get into any of that, just like
Mhm.
the original OST that came out last year, I'd love to hear, some notes that you have, direction you got from the developers, developing the main theme, and sort of doing this variation on a theme for like sort of the main princess theme, and maybe tell us a little bit about bringing on Amelia Jones.
Sure. So, do you want me to start with just the princess theme in general?
Yeah.
So, this is hard to kind of like path out in my head because the game was very different when we first started it, at least from what I knew about it. So we were doing Scarlet Hollow, and we were between episodes, and Tony and Abby were like, "Hey, we're gonna do this fun little idea. We're gonna make this really fun little short game this summer as to take a break from Scarlet Hollow." Didn't realize it was going to become a whole thing and become this, incredibly popular game that we made. So when they first told me the pitch of the idea, it's almost like a dating simulator kind of thing where you encounter this princess and she changes forms. So when I wrote like the original music for the entire demo, I didn't know about the shifting mound or the overarching themes of like uh, change versus stagnation and time and death and all of these concepts. Um, and so I just wrote like I'm like, okay, well, I need like a princessy theme, and so there are earlier versions of it, but in writing it, I knew looping was a big part of the game, so I knew it had to loop onto itself like seamlessly and just forever. So I just came up with this like super simple 4-chord progression that just arpeggiates and then like loops back into itself with a melody on top that I chose just the octaves of A and then A flat is like that was like my signifying way to mark the princess, but also knowing that I'm dealing with semitones so I can like make it creepy if I need to. That was a big part of it for me, was like, okay, I need a theme that can be turned happy or sad or creepy. So I needed like a lot of variability within the notes I'm working with.
Right. Keep it simple, keep it in a diatonic space so that when you morph it, you have a lot of paths to take. Oh, I'm saying it out loud and I'm like, yeah, a lot of paths to take.
A lot of paths to take, right. So yeah, that was like the whole concept was like, okay, so I've got looping and I've got these like, this melody, like it's a really pretty melody, but the first 4 notes are, semitonal. So it's, there is dissonance to it. So that was the main idea, was to build that around that. So yeah, that's kind of the princess theme in a nutshell, is just this 4-chord progression that loops. Very simple idea, but came together really nicely.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that stands out to me in sort of like the princess in its base form is the left hand of the piano is it never breaks from, I mean, I guess you would say it's eighth notes, but there's just sort of this meandering where, the melody has this nice syncopation, da 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 da, but the left hand is just, it's almost like a walking bass, but not like jazzy at all. It's just this very steady walking, like I'm on a path in the woods.
And I was afraid I was going to get like Stranger Things comparisons to that, because it's a similar kind of thing. But yeah, the left hand is just like you said, it's just eighth notes, and it's just basically running through these chords. But yeah, the syncopation on the right hand, I'm a big Radiohead fan. It's like impossible for me to not have that kind of weird syncopated rhythm. It's just kind of how I feel when I'm playing it.
Yeah.
That's just how it goes sometimes.
Absolutely. Yeah, and we're actually going to take a break right here, and we're going to listen to a cut of the original track, The Princess. That's track 2 on the OST. So let's take a quick listen. Okay, so that was The Princess. This is sort of the base theme, and anyone who's played the game, you are well familiar with that. You hear it every time you loop back to the beginning of chapter 1, where it just says, the princess and the hero, or the hero
Yeah.
and the princess. Like, that's the chapter title. You see it more
Yep.
than anything else because it's a looping game. And yeah, this song serves as the the main motif for so many versions, essentially so many versions of the princess, these different vessel themes. So if you look on the track list and you see like the cage, the fury, the razor, the beast, the witch, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think almost all of these are using the base theme in some form.
So it's a little like it's a little dishonest for me to say it's all one thing, which I know it's easy to look at it that way, but honestly, it's like there's a major version and a minor version are the way I would consider it. It's like all the happy, the princess, the damsel, I think even like the thorn and stuff like that. There's like that's all in A major, and then you have when it gets like darker and scarier, I keep the same idea, but I change the chords, and it changes quite a bit. So the bass like major themes, just to get nerdy with it, really simple: A major, F sharp minor, E major, C sharp minor. The minored version is like F minor, E flat, like sus4, then like an E augmented chord, and then C minor. So it's like walking down, then up, then down a little bit. But it's still keeping the same kind of eighth notes, run of the progression.
Yeah, but then there's other stuff where I think you're keeping one or the other of those forms, but there's just so much else going on.
Sure, yeah. Everything is based on one of those two progressions.
Yeah, but when you get really into some of the heavier stuff, like the nightmare or the specter, it's like now you're getting into like sort of murky, muddy, ambient,
right?
Sort of sometimes you're getting more sound than music, right?
Yeah, there's definitely some. It's like a case by case thing, and it's always based on what Tony wants, for that scene, which is good because it's like I have the ingredients for the music, right? I know the notes I have to use, so it's more of how can I make this stand out from the other tracks based on sound, instrumentation, tempo, rhythm, that kind of stuff. So I got to explore a lot of different ways to do it. Tony likes to always use the that Bruce Lee quote of "I fear not the man who knows 1,000 kicks, but the man who has practiced one kick 1,000 times," or whatever. I forget.
Yeah, he's got one really good kick, y'all.
Yeah.
Don't mess with it. So yeah, speaking of instrumentation, of course, piano and strings is sort of the bread and butter. That's the vanilla kind of what we are given, but things start getting really crazy in different aspects. But speaking of strings, about 4 or 5 months after the game's release, before Pristine Cut was out, I think this was around the time Pristine Cut was announced as a thing, Black Tabby announced sort of a small content update, a little boost, some added animations and stuff. Also included 7 or 8 new tracks. Well, they weren't new. They were live recordings of your music. And I wonder if maybe you could tell us a little bit about that. It was released as an EP called Slay the Princess Live. We have a review of it up on RPG Fan. If you could tell us a little about how that came to be and what it was like to have your music recorded by an orchestra, by a string ensemble. I think it was somewhere in Europe.
Yeah. So this is my second time working with an orchestra. I've worked with Budapest strings before on like another podcast that called Dark Dice. It's a Dungeons and Dragons podcast.
Nice.
And so I was familiar with the process a little bit, but I was part of a team, and there's a composer ahead of me on that team, and so everything kind of like even though the music I wrote, it still defaulted on him to like get it ready for the orchestra. So I had dabbled in it a little bit, but it was still a very foreign world to me. But when the game came out and it was as successful as it was, I reached out to Tony and I was like, "Hey, I think it'd be really cool if we experimented with some of these tracks and did like a live orchestral version. You can take it out of my pay. Like I offered to pay for it, and he was like, "That's crazy town. We'll pay for it. Not a big deal." So they were just like, we'll make it part of the game. I just wanted to do it as an experiment for myself to see if I had the chops, to get it ready for an orchestra. We kind of looked at like, okay, well, if we're going to do that, what would make sense? So then we were like, well, anything that deals with the shifting mound feels elevated enough to demand, the live aspect of it.
Yeah.
So transformation, the shifting mound, and then the Unknown Together was another one that came a little bit later due to some technical hiccups. But with these kinds of things, you have, you buy time. So we had like a 2-hour slot, and I was like, well, we can probably fit a few more tracks in there. So obviously the princess makes sense. It's the main theme of the game. And it's a pretty easy one to get through. Then the damsel. So that was like our scope of it. Had we had more time, there's a few more I would have done, but it was just a fun kind of idea, to celebrate the game's success and to do something cool that we thought the fans would enjoy.
And they certainly did enjoy it. And when it got mixed into the game with that content update, I mean, I think I definitely played through once to see Apotheosis with the live mixing. And yeah, it's really cool. It was mostly strings, and then there was someone on piano playing the piano part, and then in post, you also, I think maybe not all of them, but most of them already had Emilio Jones vocals in, and you mix those in post, and man, did they come out good. And before I forget, we should also talk about Amelia Jones. A lot of people knew her work from the wildly successful game Hollow Knight. Yeah. And it's a meme by now that, when is Silk Song coming? Will it ever come? Right. But in the meantime, if people wanted more Amelia Jones, she's done a couple other projects, and one of them is Slay the Princess. Her singing voice is a major component in the soundscape. I just wanted you to talk a bit about how you got her and what it was like working with her.
Sure. I sometimes get kind of emotional with this part, so just bear with me if that happens. Sure. It's a very special part of the game for me. So how it all played out was Tony was talking to me about the shifting mound, the concept of this character, right? And how it's like this entity you don't really see, but you encounter a few times before you meet like the true form of the shifting mound. And so I had proposed, I was like, well, I think it'd be really cool to implement like musical movements that would change with each iteration, right? And he liked that idea. And then I said, I think we should have a singular like voice that we tie to this character. And he liked that idea. And I know quite a few vocalists, but the reference track he gave me was City of Tears. He said from Hollow Knight. He was like, we would really like it to sound something like this. And I was like, oh, I know Amelia. Do you want me to see if she'd be interested? And they were like, yeah, duh. So so I shot her a message, and she loved the idea of like, hey, there's this character, I want to tie your voice to it, specifically, because I think, and especially at the time, I was working everything was in the box. So Amelia was the only human element to the soundtrack. And so I thought that would like make it stand out more. And so initially the idea that I had was just to have the first time you encounter the shifting mound, it just be her voice. And then stuff would start to add to it. And I think it was Tony who was like, well, what if we start with a little bit of her voice and then add to it? So now the way it goes is like the first time it's a full instrumental piece with a little bit of Amelia. The second time the instruments get peeled back, there's more voice, and then so on until the fourth movement is just her voice. And working with her in that regard was amazing. Specifically for the shifting mound movements, I gave her the chord progression. I gave her the vocal lines that I wrote, but she's so talented and so good at what she does. I was like, just give me some improv takes, just like however you're feeling, just go for it. And She did, and there are parts of those movements that I didn't write that she sang, and it's all kept in there. And it's like there's like, if I pull up the session, um, I have like a choir that I made out of her takes, and it all works so beautifully together. She made my job so easy, and that's why I always try to like. She went up on stage with me for the WSA and everything. I try to like make sure everyone knows, how important she was to this soundtrack.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, the soundtrack was already quite good, but I think its distinctiveness does come a lot from Amelia's voice and how Amelia's voice ties um, to the character of, right, the princess's quote unquote true form, or
Right.
the form that it's becoming.
Right.
This, entropy always changing, shifting mound, which I mean, anyone who's played through one playthrough the game, assuming you didn't get the quote unquote good ending, which is the little cartoon drawing
right, yeah.
of "Hooray, you slayed the
You did it.
princess," and never saw anything.
Tony's one artistic contribution to the game.
Yeah, what a champ! Great art, great crayon art. You did it. You slayed the princess. So if you play through the game and you see the shifting mound at the end of each sort of vessel path, and it's this being that's accepting each vessel, and you can even, there's this prompt that you can, part of your dialogue trees, you can optionally ask the shifting mound, hey, what do you think of this vessel? And voice, we should mention Amelia Jones does the singing, but the voice acting is also great in this game. That's Lauren Goodnight is the princess, and I never remember our hero / narrator's name.
Jonathan Sims.
That's right. Yeah. So you got Jay Sims. You got a little bit of Goodnight. It's a good party, but the sort of stoic nature, along with sort of the reverb that is done for the voice acting on the princess, the way she just sort of speaks, very like calm, not like robotic though. It's calm and very like soft, a little nurturing, very much like,
it's like soft and accepting or something.
And so she'll speak about each vessel as you get them, in whatever order you get them. And so each time you encounter the shifting mound, you get these different movements, 1 through 4, and then of course at 5, that's when you're entering the end game at that point, and you're seeing, we're pulling back the curtain and seeing some real stuff.
Exactly, yeah. And I think that's what adds, like, I think the shifting mound movements are such an emotional part for people, because it's like it's the culmination of all things, where it's like you see this art and it's like these many hands holding up this vessel that you just spoke to, and the music's playing, and it's like a really slow version of the princess with a different melody on top, and you have Amelia singing, and then like the stuff that Tony wrote, I am flickering lights and empty cityscapes and all these kinds of, like, it's like the most beautiful poetic, way to describe what these vessels mean to this entity. And it's, I don't know, it's like so that's another thing that's musically, the shifting mound movements are probably my favorite part of the game, just because of the impact it has on the player.
So with that said, let's cut to one of the shifting mound movements from live. So I guess 2, 3, or 5. Brandon,
5,
you tell me.
Sure.
We're going big. We're going 5.
Yeah, go 5. It's got the most strings in it.
All right. So let's. Yeah, it's sort of the big impressive.
It's got that big swell at the end. Yeah.
All right. So everyone, this is movement 5 of the shifting mound, live version. Wow. Man, every time I hear that track, just it's probably one of the most exciting parts of the game. I love that just before you meet, Shifting Mound in the Movement 5, the sort of true form, you go through this dialogue, though you can skip most of it if you want, but you meet the narrator essentially.
Yeah.
Because his voice leaves you at this point because it has to, and there's some story stuff around why that is and who the narrator really is. But it's pretty. The first time you play, it's really intense because it's like, oh, I'm finally going to see what's going to happen, in that cracked mirror sound effect every time, like as he's sort of breaking apart. It's very intense, and then finally you break through it all, and it's like, oh, okay, here's what's really going on, and you get this dialogue sequence that, when you face the Shifting Mound, like, you can almost think of it as like a dialogue battle scene, depending on what you're going for, like what you're attempting to do as the player. Well, I don't want to spoil too much.
I guess I should have asked about how spoilery do we get with this game, I feel like I may have said too much in the past parts of the interview.
Well, I think you're vague enough that it's okay, because only the people who know will get what you're talking about.
Sure.
But yeah, it's this sort of being confronted with maybe who or what you are, and then deciding with that information, how do I want to approach this final sequence. And what I love also about the way you wrote the Shifting Mound is the music works equally well if you decide it's a battle, or if you decide this is this is you like wanting to align with the Shifting Mound entirely.
Right.
No matter how you go, this music works. And I love that.
Do you mean when it like turns into the transformation track, like the big final track there?
Well, but even before the transformation, when you first approach her, before you get into because transformation is essentially what you hear during the battle, the dialogue battle. But before that, when you walk up to her, I think like some of the dialogue options are just like, hey, I just learned I'm the long quiet. What the heck is that? Or, hey, it's really good to see you again. Like, just sort of like before you get into the encountering each of the vessels that you've seen so far, or, choosing the option of like, let's hold hands and get out of here. Like,
right. Yeah.
Like, yeah, shifting Mound 5 like sort of puts that all into place. And then yeah, transformation is also like, that's like the drums are in by that point, right?
Yeah, that's where the drums, like that's like that was I think the direction was literally like write a Final Fantasy boss battle track.
Yeah, well, you definitely nailed it on that one.
Final Fantasy philosophy, as I've heard people call it.
Oh, I like that. I like that. So, all right. So you expand the OST with these live tracks, and then you had from then till now to create all the new music for the Pristine Cut. Of course, the Pristine Cut's big change is, and we mentioned earlier, the new path for the damsel with Happily Ever After.
Yeah.
With the track I Meant It, which is a glorious piece of music.
Oh, thank you so much.
That's one of like, I think 5 or 6 new paths, and these paths aren't endings, though they did, I think one or two new ending paths did unlock for Pristine Cut, and you wrote music for it. But the big content update was there are these sort of harder to find, more nuanced vessel paths.
Yeah.
And from Tony's standpoint, it's kind of like, I imagine he was like, well, you play through these games and see these vessels, but sometimes it's like in the dialogue tree, I was dissatisfied with my options, and there should be something else happening here. And he just expanded on it. And I imagine he just went to you and said, all right, we got Princess and the Dragon, and we got Happily Ever After and all this other stuff. And he's like, so we got some more variants of the vessel, go for it. And I wanted to ask, from your perspective, how was it sort of building a second half essentially to this game?
Yeah, I think a lot of it came as a result of when the game actually came out last year, it was pretty crunched. So I think giving Tony, Abby, and myself included, like, some time to kind of sit back and look upon our creation, and then get to reconsider, like, I think Tony always wanted to have the Fury be more than what it was.
Yes.
So it was a really short tree in the beginning, a short path.
Now it's very expanded.
Very expansive, yeah. He wanted the apotheosis to be longer. So there's all these like different things that were like kind of like quality of life things. Mm-hmm. The damsel exploration surprised me that he wanted to do that. So that's why, like, to me, when I'm like, oh, write more Fury music, that's easy enough. I know what the Fury sounds like. The cage, okay, well, I know where this is coming from.
Yeah,
that's easy enough.
I love the cage.
Yeah, I do too. And then it was the ones that surprised me the most were the Happily Ever After, because I felt like up until the Pristine Cut, the damsel was kind of always a little tongue-in-cheek, like giving the players what they want to romance the princess. It seemed kind of like, to me, there are parts of it that seems kind of disingenuous, just because like the nature of like getting along with the damsel so well and everything. So to like build a full like romance path with the damsel surprised me that they wanted to do that.
Yeah. Well, I think it was so smart too, and I am going to just full spoil this. When you unlock the damsel, in your chapter 1, essentially what you do is you resist the narrator, start to finish, doing everything to help her, and as a result, you end up dying in an attempt to stop yourself from killing her. And then so when you come back and meet the damsel, the whole problem with her is she doesn't seem to have a personality. She's one-dimensional, and her whole thing is, hey, whatever you want to do, that's what I want to do. So,
right.
And you get into these absurd dialogue options where it's like, well, wait, I thought you wanted to end the world. And she's like, well, is that what you want to do? And you can say yes or no. And she's just like, yeah, whatever, like whatever you want to do makes me happy. And it's like, so the lesson there was like, okay, if she has no agency, like that sucks, but it's not really fleshed out. And in the Happily Ever After path, boy, is that fleshed out, because at the end of that, when the lights finally go out and she just says like, I'm not happy, like, being stuck in this room, there's no way to make this work forever. I'm not happy. Like, and you just as the player are also kind of like, yeah, like I want you to be happy. I want me to be happy. And it's not working like this.
It's not working, right?
Like that frustration. Also, like anyone who's been in a relationship for more than like 3 years can relate to it, right? Like, how do you maintain a relationship if you keep yourself like entrenched in patterns and don't really like live an adventure and like literally leave the cabin together, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Like, and that's what I think, the way they described it to me was, so like up until the pristine cut, that like, since, I mean, we've already kind of dipped into spoiler territory, like the damsel, you have these first two outcomes, right? Where it's like the deconstructed, like she turns into like this warbly anime character.
Yeah.
That's horrifying. Or you have this, you're like essentially like white knighting and running off with her, right?
Right.
Before the handstaker. So, which that was the really fast, upbeat, romantic music that plays when you like leave the cabin with her. That almost didn't make it into the game. That was like one of the last editions.
Yeah.
Which is why I was surprised they wanted to do more romance stuff. So when Tony described Happily Ever After to me, and he was like, imagine like a long, excruciating death to a relationship. And I'm like, oh, like you're sitting at this table, these lights go out, and it's like you said, if anyone who knows what it's like being in a relationship for a long time, it's easy to see the parallels there. And like, that's why it's so real. That's why I think it's my new favorite path of the game.
Yeah. Well, and the realist part of it that you get with the music I meant it is after everything stops, after all the lights are out, like there are a couple things that you can do. And one of them is just be like, all right, like this isn't working. And that's the whole thing about whenever you actually leave the cabin with the princess, like, in the vessel form at that point, it's like, that just means the hands are coming and we're going to restart. But like,
right.
To just reach that moment of acceptance and be like, all right, all the greatest food in the world, all the most fun games we can play, like at some point this stops working. And to hear her say like, I'm not enjoying this, I'm not having fun here, like,
right.
Yeah, it hurts, but it's powerful. And that track name, I meant it, where and I won't spoil what that bit of dialogue can look like. What blows my mind about this path is that in some ways it's like, it's not the game's ending, but like this vessel's path is almost as good as some of the actual endings.
Yeah, it's my favorite part of the game now. Like, it's such an impactful part, and especially like they've tweeted about this. People know this. Tony has been open enough that I think I can say this. They danced to that song at their wedding. That was their first dance.
Wow.
Which, like, talk about getting emotional here. Like, that to me, like, that crushed me. You know what I mean? Just from them dancing to something that I wrote was just so, like, it was played by a live quartet. It was beautiful, amazing. So like that song means more to me than anything else, just even outside of the game, right? Yeah. For that. But that path took so much work with trying to figure out how to, the lights going out part. We tried a bunch of different stuff that didn't work.
Yeah.
Until eventually I was like, I forget whose idea it was, but I was like, what if we just have a quartet playing the theme, and each light that goes out, one of the instruments drops out until you're left with, I think it's either the viola or the cello that's left as the final instrument, because it fills the most space. So like, it's just like this dulling and crushing of the sound until it's like a one singular thing. And then once all the lights go out, it's just like the piano playing four notes. But yeah, that took a ton of work, but I love that path. I love the games and the food. It's like someone equated it to there's an old Twilight Zone episode. I think the guy's name was Rocky Valentine. He was like a gangster. He dies and goes to quote unquote heaven, where he always wins at the casino. All the women love him. All the food's amazing. Like, everything's perfect. Then he finds out it's actually hell, because like there's no, nothing is difficult. There's no challenge. He's just given everything and hates it.
Yeah. That's almost like the premise of The Good Place.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Like everything's fine, but like it also kind of sucks. And even the heaven they get to at the end of that show, season 4, like the problem with heaven is it's stagnant.
Stagnation, even good stagnation, is still, bored. It can become bored. Like, yeah, the ending of The Good Place crushed me. Like, still being like, eventually I'm going to opt out of this.
Yeah, and how that somehow brings life back. Yeah.
Yeah.
That was pretty wild. Yeah, well, we're going into certainly deep territory.
Impending death is the only sign of life.
Yeah, I'm gonna leave it to listeners to go dig up "I Meant It" for themselves, and actually the whole soundtrack y'all should be buying. I'm just saying it outright. If you get the game on Steam, there's like a really, I can't remember how much it costs, but it's not too much for like a founders content kind of bonus thing,
supporters
or like
pack. It's like $10 or something
pack
like that.
that gets you OST plus pristine cut, which is all the live tracks are in there too. So the only thing you don't get, which you're going to have to go to Brandon's Bandcamp page, which we'll have in the show notes, a link to this, is the lost cuts, which I want to take a moment talking about, because you mentioned how much work you put into making Lights Go Out work. And I've noticed on lost cuts, there are maybe 2 or 3 Lights Go Out, sort of like you taking a stab at it.
So the lost cuts thing is like, because the supporter pack, I get a cut of that. Like, Tony and Abby are always great with that kind of stuff. But like, I was kind of playing with the idea of my Spotify. There's so much Slay the Princess on there, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much music that I was kind of cleaning up all my files at the end, and I was like, man, there's a lot of music I wrote that didn't make the game. I don't want to put it on Spotify. That's just too much stuff. So I was like, okay, what if I have like my own like support the composer pack kind of thing? So it's 51 tracks that didn't make it into the game. There's a good number of them where you can see how they led to other tracks, but like, so it's kind of like, I thought it'd be a cool like behind the scenes kind of peek at like, oh, here's the concepts and ideas we played with before finalizing anything. So it's got like the original princess theme, which is way more video gamey and synthy, before Tony told me no synthesizers. So like the original princess theme sounds like it would be in Scarlet Hollow, if you ask me. Like, it's a very similar kind of tone. But yeah, so I thought, I've got all these files, and the community is so awesome and so supportive, and they love getting more stuff. So I've like on the Discord, I've asked, like, would you guys want these tracks that like, that didn't make it into the game? Some of them are more fleshed out than others. Like, there's like some of the witch themes that are way different than what you get in the game, that kind of stuff. And everyone always said, they would be into it. So I thought, why not? So I put it out there.
Yeah. So you had mentioned, Lights Go Out is an example of a track that took multiple attempts to get it right. So I think I'm looking here, Lights Go Out. Yeah, there's 2 tracks, sort of 2 other concepts from Lights Go Out. Do you remember working on these and why they got cut in the end?
They got so.
I mean, in some ways they got cut because you figured out what to do with the quartet,
right? So the way I work, and like, I've always like, I'm a believer in taste, like trust your taste. So a lot of the times, I'll feel like, okay, I wrote this thing, but it doesn't really feel right. Or if Tony doesn't think it feels like, until it's like a eureka moment where like, okay, this is it, then I'm confident with it.
Yeah.
So I was working in tandem as Tony was writing the Happily Ever After stuff and the Lights Go Out. And sometimes when we're working in tandem like that, he doesn't have the full idea realized yet. So I'm kind of just like a shotgun approach where I'm just trying things. And so there's some other ones that didn't even get on the lost cuts, because it's just like the idea was too basic. It wasn't worth anyone even hearing. But it's like, how do I make it sound more plastic or stale? And that was the big thing. Was
I saw there is a track there called like Plastic Happy Ending or whatever. Yeah,
that is one of them. But it's just like the whole idea of like, how do I make, okay, so we know we want to use strings, but how do I make strings sound stale and like boring?
Yeah.
And then I think we eventually realized that that's not the way to go about it. That's just like, that's when we figured, oh, let's just peel back instrument by instrument, and that'll be how it feels right.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's almost always like a gut thing. Like if I play a piece of music and I look at the art and I'm like, this doesn't feel right, then it's back to the drawing board.
One of my favorites on the Lost Cuts, it's a shorter track, but it gives you an idea of what could have been. Nightmare 6/8.
Yeah, the 6-8
right?
time of Nightmare. Yeah.
Well, okay, so I actually love it, and I love the idea of putting it in that time signature.
Yeah.
Problem, um, I can't repeat the 4 words, right? Lungs, heart, liver, nerves
Yeah.
at this steady plodding 4/4
Right.
against the 6/8. I mean, not easily. You would kind of lose. It wouldn't work. You really need that sort of breathy in out of 4/4 to keep
Yeah.
that whole scene working. But musically, I really
Yeah.
liked playing with the idea of like, oh yeah, what if we did this one in a different time signature?
Yeah, and that's like I said earlier, like the different ways you try to play with these same chords, because it's like a desperation thing of like, oh God, how could I possibly do this differently than I've already done it
Yeah,
40, 50, 60, 70 times?
yeah,
So I was like, oh, I'll try it in 6/8, and that's more of like, because the Nightmare, above all else, I was trying, even in the 4/4 one and the regular one, I was trying to give it kind of a waltzy feel.
yeah,
So it's kind of going dun 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 dun, like it's going up, and it's got this like, because the Nightmare has like those gloves, and she's always kind of like dancing around and kind of thing, and it's got a music box feel to it.
yeah. Very like I always think of like a music box with a carousel going around. That's how I feel
Exactly.
about the Nightmare. Yeah,
That's exactly what I was going for, and so I thought, well, shoot, if I'm doing a waltz, I might as well try a waltz. So I tried a 3/4 and I tried a 6/8, and I'm just like, it just doesn't
yeah,
fit the same.
yeah. Yeah, but I love that the concept is there, and I really do like the lost cuts.
I appreciate that.
At time of recording, I don't have a review typed up, but one is coming because I love
Nice.
prototype and unused music. It's a great category of music that very few composers, let their fans go behind the curtains and hear this stuff.
Sure.
Um,
Well, the other reason for it, if I can say, just because it's like,
sure.
a lot of times, composers like video game composers, whatever, media composers, if you write a song that doesn't work for a thing, you just use it on another thing, right? Like, you can save, if you wrote a big epic battle track for a video game and they didn't like it, you're not going to throw it away. You're just going to save it. Maybe you can use it on another project. I don't really have that luxury when every track is the same melody and chord progression. Like,
Right.
I can't.
You can't
Yeah.
pass this off. I mean, the only way you could is, if Black Tabby makes some other game and they decide to do some cute cameo reference to Slay the Princess,
Exactly.
then you can pull in a track, but that's about it.
Yeah, and that's a pretty niche moment there. So it's not like, oh, Brandon's scoring another game. This sounds a lot like Slay the Prince. I don't want that.
Yeah,
so
I can't have that.
Right. So it was just more of like well, what do I do with all this music? Okay,
Yeah.
I'll just put it out there, see if
Yeah.
people like it.
Awesome. So as we've been talking, I want to move away from Slay the Princess because we've more than once now mentioned a game called Scarlet Hollow, which I have only played the first episode of, so
Okay.
I'm like behind. But yeah, Scarlet Hollow was actually the project that Black Tabby was doing before Slay the Princess, and then in the middle of them doing this long form project, they're like, oh, here's some other project that now has
Right.
popped off. But I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about Scarlet Hollow and your work on it so far.
Okay, so I love Slay the Princess, and I love what it's become, and I love how the fans have received it. But Scarlet Hollow is like my jam. I love Scarlet Hollow. And that's also maybe a thing because I mean I love the philosophy behind Slay the Princess. As someone who experiences existential dread on a daily basis, I'm very into this game's story.
Yeah.
But I'm also a big like character person, and so Scarlet Hollow is like all characters and like writing character themes, which is like my favorite thing. I love writing character themes. So Scarlet Hollow, we have 4 of the 7 episodes out. Episode 5 is currently in production. I'm not going to give any information or idea of when that's coming out, because the fans are patiently waiting for that, and I don't have any information to help them. But yeah, Scarlet Hollow is just like your character that you create is part of this family, and you're going back home for a funeral for your aunt, and you're in Appalachia, North Carolina, and like weird stuff starts happening in the town. It's all kind of tied to you, more or less, you and your family. There's all this spooky stuff going on. So in that sense, it's a much more like horror game. Well, like horror adjacent spooky game. Like there's definitely like some pretty graphic stuff in it. I don't know. I guess you would call it a horror game. I don't know. But yeah, and it's just like you meet all these characters in town, so every character has like their own musical theme, and I don't know. It's just really different.
Yeah, and the idea that it's so long form, not just that the game, it's each episode is very long, and there's just so much narrative.
Oh God, yeah.
Also, like that it's episodic. That like people who have been playing it, they will have been playing it for years by the time it's all out.
Sure.
And yeah, it definitely it is sort of the difference between like in some ways it's like Scarlet Hollow's like a really good long running TV show, and Slay the Princess is it's like Inception or something. It's just one big awesome movie with a great concept and a time loop.
Yeah, you can get through and quote unquote beat Slay the Princess in 2 to 3 hours. You cannot do that with Scarlet Hollow.
No.
People question Tony's sanity when they look at the paths and different routes you can take in Slay the Princess. Go look at Scarlet Hollow. It's so much grander, the scope of it. I forget if he said if it already does or it will eventually have a higher word count than the entirety of the Harry Potter series.
Jeez.
So yeah, it's a big game.
That's wild. Yeah, I knew it had a ton of content just in text alone.
Yeah.
So how much music have you written for it so far?
That's a good question. Let me pull that up. I have written, if I go to this page, because I don't know offhand. Scarlet Hollow episode 1, I wrote 13 tracks. So 13, that's 23, and then 23, 36. So 46 pieces so far.
Wow. So we're looking, and average length of those 2-ish minutes?
Yeah, 2 to 5. Some of them are a bit longer.
So that's a lot of music.
Yeah, but a lot of it, especially with like, so Scarlet Hollow, like episode 1 and 2, was really me cutting my teeth, learning how to write game music.
Yeah.
It's because it's totally different. Making something that can loop onto itself is, scoring a scene in a film or something. You're reacting to what's happening on screen.
Right.
Doing it for a game, the player can sit on that screen for a year if they want, and it has to keep looping. So, trying to learn how to do the loops. So, the track length kind of varies because sometimes there's like almost like a superficial extra minute on the end of like getting it back to a place where it can loop back to the start. Mm-hmm. So the length is kind of tricky, I guess.
And those soundtracks, are those also available on your Bandcamp page, I believe? Yeah,
they're on Bandcamp and Spotify and all that stuff. And I think I've even on like Spotify, I've got like a whole playlist of everything so far.
All right. Well, people got to check that one out. Yeah. If you like the Slay the Princess soundscape and you like the music, you got to check out Scarlet Hollow. I know, like I said, I'm still working my way through the first bit, and I'll probably be committing to all 7. It sounds awesome. Though if I take my time, maybe I won't have to wait, right?
But that's the thing is like, if people
I play slowly enough, episode 7 will come out when I'm reaching episode 7.
Part of me is really curious, like how the game's going to be received once all 7 episodes are out.
Right, that people can play it as a full compilation.
Yeah, it's still early access. I get a lot of people are waiting. Like people don't even want to start it until it's all ready, which I totally get. It's just going to take a lot of time. This game is such a bigger scope than Slay the Princess. But like it's just different for me because like the music is so much more video gamey music, and like the characters like Reese and Avery and Kanika, like writing their themes is just, it's so much fun. I love writing character themes.
Yeah.
And it's not all the same 4 chords.
Right. Yeah. You get to do a lot more.
Yeah.
Because you're working with, traditionally with video games, 1 character equals 1 new motif you can work with.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's awesome. I wanted to ask you, for as long as you've been doing music, both with, podcasts, radio drama, and with video games, what does it look like for you to sort of pace yourself, thinking about the sort of evergreen problems of fatigue and burnout for game music composers? We talk about this a lot with other composers. I'm wondering, what do you do to keep yourself sane as you're working on all these projects?
Oh, burnout is real. So with no sleep, I write about 20 tracks a week.
Wow.
So I've been doing that for years. So I've been pretty good at, like, I don't get writer's block really. I've adopted the Stephen King method of I clock in for 8 hours and I clock out kind of thing. So I just work. I don't really judge or critique the music that I write in that sense. But for something where I do have to go back and review it, like a video, like Slay the Princess or Scarlet Hollow, I don't know. I used to not have any problem, and then I did Slay the Princess, and it kind of broke me in a way, to where I'm still kind of trying to bounce back. And I think it's just and I'm not complaining. It's the best thing I've ever worked on, but it's just the like going from the mindset of like repeating the same motif, a billion times, to trying to write something new has been a lot harder than I've expected. So it's just like it's like working out a muscle that's atrophied or something like that. It just takes time. Listening to other music, that's what I've been desperately trying to do, is just listening to other soundtracks, trying to get new ideas. I call it like refueling. So I'm trying to refuel my creativity by listening to other artists. That's really the only way for me to get past it.
That's wild, because that's my next question.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I wanted to get into favorites and preferences. So if you got music you're listening to help you refuel, I'm wondering, what's the media you're looking at? Who are the musicians you're listening to of any type? Classical, popular music, commercial,
Sure.
TV, film, game score. What have you been listening to that helps you sort of refill your tank and not be stuck in your own soundscape?
Yeah. So it changes a lot. I tend to like hyperfixate on an album, and I'll just like right now, and I blame Abby for this. She got me into the band Health.
Oh yeah.
So Health's Rat Wars I have had on repeat for like 3 months, and I can't stop listening to it. But outside of that, like when it comes to like scores and stuff, my typical go-tos, my two biggest influences are Johnny Greenwood and Trent Reznor.
Okay.
So like There Will Be Blood is maybe my favorite score of all time.
The film.
Yeah, the film's amazing.
Yeah.
And that's up there with like I think Phantom Thread is one of the best film scores ever written. Then with Trent Reznor, it's like the Social Network and Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. So a lot of it is just like I'll go like ride my bike and listen to that for like an hour and just try to pick apart what they're doing and what makes it so special to me. I've been listening to the Poor Things soundtrack.
Oh yeah. I haven't seen the movie yet, but I've wanted to. I heard it's pretty wild.
Well, that's the thing is I listen to the music before I see the movie in general. But Jerskin was there. He won 2 awards at the award show I was at, so I was really intrigued by it, and so I've been listening to that. And it's really eclectic. It's really different.
Huh.
I've also been listening to "Promising Young Woman," by Anthony Willis. The Uzumaki Colin Stetson soundtrack.
Yeah.
I listen to a lot of the Newton Brothers. They're the Mike Flanagan composers for like Haunting a Hill House and all that kind of stuff.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Alan
love
Wake
Haunting
2.
a Hill House.
Oh yeah, it's an amazing show.
Yeah.
And the Newton Brothers are incredibly talented.
Yeah.
Alan Wake 2, which also additional shout out to Amelia Jones for being on the DLC for that game.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I think she sings the final track of the game.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, I love Alan Wake. I love that. After a decade, they're like, oh yeah, here's a sequel.
Right?
It's like, thank you. I really liked the first game.
I still have to beat the second one. I was waiting for it to get spooky again, so now's a good time to pick it back up. So yeah, it varies. But I would say like Johnny Greenwood, Trent Reznor, Bernard Herrmann. Those are kind of like my main go-tos.
Yeah. So of everyone you just talked about, I would love for you to give us one song for the listeners, and that can be the song that we play out this interview to.
Oh, so I'm going to pick us. Oh, I got you. Hold on. I'm going to pick something from Phantom Thread.
Okay.
Let's go with House of Woodcock from Phantom Thread.
All right. Yeah, let's wrap up, and then after we wrap up, everyone, you're going to hear House of Woodcock from Phantom Thread, and that'll be the end of the interview. So yeah, that sounds really good. Before I let you go, Brandon, we already plugged. You got a Spotify, you got a Bandcamp. Is there anything else that the world needs to know about how to find you, interact with you, listen to your music?
I'm on Twitter or X or whatever. Wondrous Sound.
Wondrous Sound.
Wondrous Sound.
Everyone follow. I follow.
Yeah. I chose like a word combination that people really struggle with. So please find me at Wondrous Sound.
Yeah, you do the OU vowel twice.
Yeah. Yep. That was not a great idea on my part. And then Brandon Boone Music on Instagram. I'm pretty easy to find. But yeah, my Bandcamp, brandonboone.bandcamp.com. I'm on Spotify.
That's where
Apple
I
Music.
am. I'm grabbing up that music. Like,
I love that. That's where like people always ask, what's the best way to support you? Like Bandcamp.
Purchase on Bandcamp is the best way to support. Yep.
If you want to wait until Bandcamp Friday, then I get 100% of it. So it's super great.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's those are like, either that or just, I even love, obviously Spotify has its problems, but like it's great passive income. It's good to have good numbers on Spotify, so I have no complaints with that either.
Well, unless you have something to I'm gonna try this might not work.
Can I add one last quick thing?
Yeah, sure.
We kind of touched on it a little bit. Speaking of like the game, and I realized we didn't really touch on the dragon and the princess very much.
Yeah.
I just wanted to say Amelia is also awesome on this, and then my friend Andrew Goodwin does the woodwinds on it. He's awesome.
Yeah.
And then again on I Meant It. Shout out to Mateus and different Andrew for the string parts. But yeah, the dragon and the princess asking Amelia just to hum on this track was freaking awesome. I was so happy with that. I love that track.
I didn't realize that you had to reach out to her for a separate recording of that. I thought that was pulled from another stem that she had done.
No. Yeah,
wow.
I'm always trying to get her on whatever I can.
Yeah.
So
yeah, well, Princess and the Dragon was very much needed, and I think humming's great. If people have played it, spoiler alert, you get a POV change, and you really get to see what the other character looks like,
right?
Like finally for the first time,
right?
And we should have mentioned this. There are a handful of other studio musicians that you've had play different instruments, even back to the original OST. So
Dan Zappulla on guitar. Scotty Wells did some guitar on Apotheosis. I'm a big fan of outsourcing the stuff that I am not capable of doing very well myself. It's a great privilege as a composer is to hire real musicians to work with you. So yeah, shout out to all those guys and gals, and this, obviously especially Amelia. But yeah, when Tony mentioned the dragon and the princess, and I'm like, oh, so she's just kind of sitting there, and you're in her point of view, and she's just in this basement. She'd probably be humming to herself, right? So that's why I was like, can we bring Amelia back?
That's so smart.
I think Tony's response is more or less like, why do you even ask me? Yes, of course, bring Amelia back on. Like,
yeah. Oh, I love that. All right, so shout outs to all those awesome instrumentalists who have worked on. I want to call it STP, but then it's like, is that Stone Temple Pilots? No,
yeah.
Slay the Princess.
You got to keep the lowercase t. It only works in text.
Yeah, that's true. It really does. The lowercase t really sells it for me. I'm like, I know what we're talking about now.
Yeah. Shout out to Stone Temple Pilots.
Shout out to Stone Temple Pilots, no doubt. And hey, this might not work, but I'm going to try. Anything else that you're working on that you would like to hint at or tell us about? I mean, obviously, we know you're working on the next episode of Scarlet Hollow. Is there anything else I can dig out of you?
Oh, in a hypothetical scenario in the future where Black Tabby does another game, it's going to be very good.
All right, we'll take that. Hypothetical scenario. Another Black Tabby game that might not be Scarlet Hollow will also have great music. And, of course, also great writing and great art. I mean, gosh, we haven't even talked about it much. I mean, we talked about it a bit, but man, Abby's art, the animations that she added for Pristine Cut are just they really bring so much life to the game. I mean, if you played the original game and you haven't played Pristine Cut, I mean, the new content, the new music, like, yes, but like totally awesome.
Yeah.
But man, there's these scenes that she's added like so much work to, like it's true animation. It'll blow your mind.
And she more or less, I think, taught herself how to do that while working on this.
Yeah, she taught herself for this game. Yeah,
everything that happens in transformation is amazing.
The new end game sequence with transformation is beast, and then I think Apotheosis got some added frames as well.
Yeah. Also, people should go look up the Waltz trailer, the announcement trailer, where there's animation of the Long Quiet and the princess dancing, and it's awesome.
That's a great
crushed
trailer.
It.
Totally. All right, well, we're gonna head out here, and you guys enjoy. What's the song again?
House of Woodcock by Johnny Greenwood from Phantom Thread.
All right, we're gonna hear some Phantom Thread, House of Woodcock, Johnny Greenwood. Thank you so much, Brandon.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right, bye.
So that was our show. What a great interview. Of course, I'm going to repeat here, but I want to also thank Brandon for his time talking to us about his work, and of course for his work on Slay the Princess. Thank you, of course, to Pat. Not that I'm in the room with you right now, Pat, but thank you for running that interview. This was a really good one. I'm glad this all came together. Since Pat's also the one that reached out to Brandon in the first place and got this together. So just a great time. Coming up next on Rhythm Encounter, we are doing a build your own RPG hard mode. If you go back about a year, we did a build your own RPG episode where we took music from different soundtracks and put them together to something that we decided was cohesive enough. So we had so much fun with it. We're doing a new version of it with some more difficult rules. We will talk about that in the episode. So please look forward to Build Your Own RPG hard mode coming up in a couple weeks. And then after that, we are doing our Music of the Year episode for 2024. So there was a ridiculous amount of good games that came out in 2024. And of course, many of them had great soundtracks as well. So there's going to be a lot of good music to talk about. So be sure to check those out. If you have feedback on this, if you have thoughts on future topics, future guests, or anything else, you can reach us at music@rpgfan.com. Of course, Rhythm Encounter is not the only podcast in the RPG Fan Podcast Network. We also have Random Encounter and Retro Encounter. Somewhat recently, Random Encounter did actually a pair of big year-end episodes. They talked about the recent Game Awards from earlier this month, following up with our most anticipated of 2025. That's a feature on rpgfan.com, but we always do a podcast where we invite people on to talk about their own, favorites on our list. So be sure to check that out. Random Encounter posts every other Monday, opposite of Rhythm Encounter. And over on Retro Encounter, our weekly podcast of many topics, Retro Encounter is actually hitting a huge, huge milestone this month. After finishing up a Dragon Quest III game journal last week, they did a year in review, as Retro Encounter always does, for 2024. And later this week, we are, unfortunately, saying goodbye to longtime Retro Encounter host Michael Solosi, who is not leaving RPG Fan entirely, but he is stepping down as host of Retro Encounter. And, 450 episodes in, I can't blame him. He's built up such a great body of work, but sometimes people need a break. I have not heard the episode yet as of this recording. I don't know exactly what will go on in the episode, but I know episode 450 is Solosi's final episode as a host, and I'm sure I will be talking about this more in other episodes in and around this time period. But I'm going to say here that we wish him the best. I never imagined Retro Encounter would have become as successful as it did. And that is absolutely because of his leadership and running that show. Years and years of fantastic episodes and content, game journals, other topics, quiz shows, so many wonderful things have come up because of how Solosi runs that show and just his great ideas and presence as a host. No small number of people on staff at RPG Fan right now came to us because of Retro Encounter. So I'm going to say here, and I will probably be saying it for a few more episodes in the future, that we will miss him as host, but we thank you, Solosi, for everything you have done. So yeah, please, if you enjoy Retro Encounter at all, do not miss episode 450. The show is not ending. The show will continue. Zach Wilkerson will be the new host, and that will be discussed in the future. But yeah, Retro 450 is a milestone episode for a lot of reasons. So be sure to check that out later this week. You can also find RPG Fan on most social media. You'll find us as RPG Fan Com on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, Twitter, our Twitch channel, YouTube. We have a Discord. You can also find us on Blue Sky at RPG Fan. All of these links are in our show notes and on our website, rpgfan.com, where you'll also find our shop. And if you want a really short way of getting there, just go to rpgfan.com/shop. We have RPG Fan merch, apparel, mugs, and other goodies. There's some new t-shirt options, hoodies, since it is in the middle of winter for some parts of the world. So check all that out. You can also get our RPG Fan review card collection, a collaboration with Hyperplay RPG. We debuted that actually just over a year ago now. It's been really popular, so check that out if you haven't. And finally, if you enjoyed this episode, we would love it if you could review us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube. Well, you can't review us on YouTube. Subscribe on YouTube. Review, rate, subscribe, anything you can do, wherever it is you listen. All of that helps us and helps the show reach more listeners on whatever platforms that you're listening on. So thank you again for listening. Thank you, Pat and Brandon, for giving us the opportunity to post this wonderful episode. We will now see you in a couple weeks for Build Your Own RPG Hard Mode. And I am definitely looking forward to that. So we'll see you then. Bye, everyone. And wow, that's quite a dog.